Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today's video is the Alienware M17 R3. I'll see how this one compares to the M15 R3 variant, but also how does a 2070 Super Max P compare to a 2080 Max Q? Watch to find out. Let's roll. So this one here is the Lunar Light model. Quite a popular choice, it seems. It's got great contrast across the lid and the cooling on the back. And the one thing that I have to say is the finish on this is a magnesium alloy. And this is really good at resisting fingerprints. Probably one of the best I've seen in any notebook, in fact. So let's get to the specs. Let's crack it open and see what it looks like underneath. So cracking it open, you can see that the motherboard is actually flipped. So if you are looking to repaste the GPU or CPU, you will have a little bit of work ahead of you. So the processor in this unit is the Intel i7-10750H, that's 6 cores, 12 threads, boosting up to 5 gigahertz. The screen is an impressive 300 hertz, 3 millisecond response with 100% of the sRGB, has 16 gigs of memory at 2666 megahertz. So this also comes with 16 gigs of memory, that's 2666 megahertz. However, they are soldered in place, so not user upgradable or serviceable, really a flaw in my opinion. So I would recommend definitely getting the warranty on this if you're going to have this for a number of years. The reality is if the memory module fails, you're going to have to replace the entire motherboard, and that could lead to a very expensive repair. It also has a 1 terabyte NVMe SSD and of course the 2070 Super Max P going all the way up to 115 watts. Also includes killer wireless and killer Ethernet going all the way up to 2.5 gig, a battery of 86 watt hour, and that's all in a chassis that's 6.65 pounds. And of course, this unit has plenty of vents to keep it cool. We have 2 exhausts out the back, 2 off the side on the left and the right. We even have some venting on the lid itself. So that is quite impressive. When we look at the rest of the unit, we of course have our glass precision touchpad. It's quite nice, very quiet. Our keyboard is a full keyboard layout, including our numpad on the right-hand side, and each of the keys are RGB lit. The one thing that I have to say about this is it's probably one of the best keyboards. It has 1.7 millimeters of key travel, which means it feels really tactile when you're typing on it. In fact, I find this is probably one of the best ones I've tested thus far. So exactly the same as the M15, in fact. Now, during heavy use or gaming, I did find that the keys would get quite warm, specifically around the middle of the keyboard. So your WASD keys were okay, but I saw that peak up as high as 40 degrees Celsius, which is a little too warm in my opinion. Now, heat on the top deck did get pretty warm, getting up to 50 degrees. Really seeing that kind of in the back area here on the deck, which you're really not touching, as well as the exhaust off the back. So that's to be expected, but something to be aware of nonetheless. So overall, the palm rests themselves, while warm, did not get too hot like I did find in the Razer Blade Advanced Edition. So I think you'd find this quite comfortable overall. So pivoting into the device itself, the Alien Command Center. This is really the hub of the software for Alienware. One of the unique features about this was actually the fact that it can change your thermal profile automatically depending on the game. So you can actually set up specific profiles for your games as you see fit. You can of course also change your RGB light, so that's within the FX settings. There's several settings baked in, and you of course can customize them as you wish. And of course you can turn everything off if you choose and go into full stealth mode. But function F12 also allows you to disable all lights on the unit if you choose. Now, the Fusion module, that's where the magic happens. Depending on your CPU, the 10750H does not allow for undervolting or overclocking, of course, but you can overclock your GPU in that. And that's pretty impressive. The fact that, number one, they allow for it, but number two, that the cooling in this unit can actually dissipate that additional heat. I was actually able to overclock the 2070 Super in this unit by 140 megahertz on the core, as well as the memory. Now that's impressive. And I'll actually show you some of the gaming benchmarks with those settings a little bit later. So this one can be undervolted, so you can reduce the overall thermals coming off your CPU, which is nice. Of course, you can fire up throttle stop or XTU. I was able to take this down about 0.1 millivolt, which is pretty decent. Not crazy, but it does drastically reduce the CPU temperatures. I'll show you a little bit about what that looks like in the benchmarks to come. Now, in terms of noise levels, on quiet, this thing was able to do around 33 decibels, so very, very easy to work with at that sound level. At balance, you're seeing around 45 decibels, performance 50 to 51, and of course at full speed, seeing around 60 to 63 decibels. All right, guys, let's get to the benchmarks. This is really impressive. So in PC Mark 10, the M17 got a score just under 6,000. I did actually expect it to do a little bit better here, but nonetheless, this is what it was able to get, right in around the middle of the pack. So now moving over to Cinebench R20. I wanted to actually show something a little bit unique in that you could see each of the thermal profiles and their scores, as well as their undervolt equivalents. So you can see here that between balance and performance, it was really net neutral, the same score throughout. And then with quiet did have thermal throttling. So it did hit its thermal limit, started to declock the CPU down. And then you can see the undervolt was actually able to maintain a higher score, breaking into 3,000 points. So let's take a look at the temperatures. You can actually see the orange line here across each of the thermal profiles, each of the undervolts, and you can see where that 100 degrees Celsius came in. So here is where it was really shocking. With the undervolt was about 0.1 volts under the stock thresholds, which is fairly good, but you can see the drastic reduction in temps. So you can see that go from 100 all the way down to 74 degrees Celsius. It's a great indicator of how well an undervolt can actually perform. All right, so now let's get into Call of Duty Modern Warfare. 1080p max settings, ray tracing on, tessellation set to near. The M17 came at the highest score at 96.5 frames per second. This was incredible. The fact that this was not only able to beat everything that I've tested so far, it was actually able to beat both 2080 Supermax Qs. So now moving over to 3D Mark, you can see that both the Alienware M17 and the M15 were set to performance mode, as well as undervolt and an overclock on the GPU. But you can see how close they are, really neck and neck. The 2080 still actually getting out ahead, but just barely. Now heading over to Anno 1800, again, very CPU intensive benchmark. This was just able to slide over by a half a frame per second. So Metro Exodus 1080p between low all the way up to extreme. Again, the Alienware M17 with the 2070 Super was able to outperform everything. All right, so moving over to Death Stranding. This one you can definitely see the 2080s flexing their CUDA core muscle. The M17 was able to come in at around 97 frames per second, still very respectable for this game. So heading over to Forza Horizon 4 all ultra settings, this one posted 137 frames, again topping the scores across the bunch. So now moving over to Flight Simulator all ultra settings, you can see with silent and undervolted about 45 frames per second, moving up to balanced at 49, and then performance and performance with overclock, just about 51, 52, really just kind of trading blows with the 2080 Super and the M15. Again, very playable at this setting and very impressive looking. Now heading over to Fortnite, all epic settings. This one again, top of the charts at 133 frames per second. And then Apex Legend, all max settings. This was able to get all the way up to 175 frames per second. This 2070 Super is so impressive. All right, now moving into Red Dead Redemption 2 Ultra settings, this was able to post 71 frames per second under the balance profile. This was really the sweet spot for playing this game, but also giving the best noise levels as well. But you can see that effectively it ties the 2080 Super. So actually what I wanted to show you here in Tomb Raider was the thermal profiles across all the different settings. So you can see here the best out of the bunch, again, still being quiet, of course at 41 decibels, and still posting 99 frames per second. If you wanted to go all out, that would hit you 111 frames per second at a cost of about 51 decibels. Now, when we talk about temps across the board, outside of quiet, we're seeing about 92 degrees on the CPU and around 75 degrees on the GPU. So that wraps up our benchmarks. I'm so impressed by the 2070 Super that's in this unit. The fact that even with a mild overclock, that it could keep up with a mild overclock on the 2080 Super. That's so impressive, and still keep the thermals in check. Like, we're only seeing on average about 75 degrees on the GPU. I tell you, there's so much thermal headroom in this. The limit on the GPU was actually set to 86 degrees. So the fact that it was able to keep that 10 degrees lower and still effectively trade blows back and forth on those benchmarks with the 2080 Super, I just mind blown. So really, what does that tell me? Well, there's no compelling reason to actually put a 2080 Supermax Q in these units. It really doesn't give you any additional performance that a 2070 Super can't give you. The benches speak for themselves. So let's talk about the screen. So while the screen is great, fantastic color, like the colors just pop on this unit. It gets all the way up to 100% of the sRGB, and you can tell, especially when you have a notebook that doesn't have it right beside it, like the Asus TUF A15. The reality is that once you see it, you can't pick anything else. So I highly recommend you get a screen that has the sRGB of 100%, because once you know that, it is so gorgeous. But the one challenge is with the 300 Hertz panel, it can't engage the integrated graphics card. So what does that mean? Well, it means that the battery life in this unit suffers immensely. So the battery life would actually only hit around 100 minutes. And simply in a laptop, that's just not good enough. In terms of screen bleed, unfortunately, this unit did suffer from screen bleed. It does actually have a lower left-hand corner that bleeds out actually pretty bad. In fact, when you have anything that's black on the screen, you can actually see it in the corner in a well-lit room, unfortunately. So that's pretty sad. Again, this is unacceptable in any kind of premium laptop, in my opinion. When I look at this notebook and I hear the noise levels, I did find that the noise level compared to the M15 is actually a little bit higher pitched. And so I do find that a little bit more annoying than the M15. I found that one was really good, especially in quiet mode. But when the fans do wrap up on this one, it is fairly higher pitched. Now, in terms of the delta in performance, often what we're seeing is that between quiet and performance, we see around a 3 to 10% variance in performance. So something to look out for. I really love operating a notebook as quiet as possible and still gaming on it. You're able to actually hear the onboard audio. Now, the good thing about this unit is that the onboard audio is actually fairly decent. It does have the two standard under-firing speakers and then two front-facing speakers. Again, this gives you great positional audio. I actually find this to be one of the best. Most notebooks out there actually only have two speakers, so the fact that you get 4 speakers in this can really give you a sense of immersion. So the differences between the M15 and the M17. The M17, of course, being that it's a larger deck, does actually have the full numpad on the right-hand side. The one thing that I have to note, though, is this unit is heavy. It gains an additional 2 pounds over the M15. And the other thing is of course, being that it's a 1080p screen, you do get lower pixel density. It's maybe just not quite as crisp. You may or may not notice that, but something worth to note. And I did again find that the sound in this unit was just a little bit higher pitch as it related to the noise. So it just has a little bit more whininess to it as the fans spool up. All right, so final thoughts on the M17R3. Well, unfortunately, this one has died on me literally as I am recording this video. So It will not power on outside of giving me the RGB on the keyboard. Did some troubleshooting on it. It looks like it is dead. It's not posting, unfortunately. So unfortunately, this one's going to have to go back. However, while it was working, this was hands down the fastest notebook I have ever tested, along with the quietest. The fact that this is able to outperform many of the 2080 Supermax Qs that I was testing before, that is impressive unto itself. Now, the first issue with this, of course, battery life. If you pick the 300Hz screen, you're going to get an abysmal battery life performance. Now, that being said, I think Dell has done a great job overall. This unit came in at around $3,000 Canadian from Best Buy, and I think for the spec, it's quite good. Now, you can get better value for the money, but I think what Dell's created here is a really good combination between the premium finishing all over the unit, the full key RGB, the great performance that's packed into the unit. You couple all that together, is it worth maybe $500 over an MSI? Maybe, but you'll have to be the judge of it. All I can say is I think this is a really good unit. Looks really sharp, so you be the judge. So for me, I still find a 17-inch a little bit too big. Of course, I want to be able to move it around a little bit more. That 6.5 pounds of heft is just too much. I think the same specs actually put into an M17 chassis would probably be the Goldilocks zone here. Now, that all being said, I think in terms of an IMO score, I would give this a 8 out of 10. That wraps up the Alienware M17 R3. Thanks for watching. I'll leave a link to the notebook in the description below. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Love to hear from you, so please comment down below. And until next time, bye for now.